Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We are getting into week 4 of the 2020 Pre-accelerator here at Geekdom, and it is an incredibly exciting Tuesday afternoon. It's also beautiful outside, and it feels like maybe, just maybe, we might be past the hottest part of summer. Let's hope so. It is my pleasure to have our new guest, which is Michael Roth with Evo Security, join us. He's one of our Pre-accelerator startup founders. He is working on some amazingly cool stuff in the security space. And with that, I'll let Michael kind of pop on here and tell us a little bit more about your background and experience and how you got involved with Evo.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Appreciate you having me. This is really exciting, pretty cool opportunity. So appreciate it. Let's see, a little bit about myself. I started my career as an engineer, actually in the oil and gas business. Being in Texas, that makes a lot of sense. So went to UT Austin and spent a lot, over 10 years in that space, and had no clue that I was ever going to get into security, but eventually kind of realized that I wanted my career to change directions, and was kind of working on a few ideas, and ultimately moved back to Austin and said, okay, I'm going to get into tech. And I'd been hanging around incubators and accelerators and really trying to become familiar with how to start a technology business, preparing myself for that actual move. And I reached out to the UT's supercomputing center because I was working on some ideas around cloud and speed of computation and security. And I said, hey, what do you think about this idea? And they said, well, that idea is not very good, but we've got some others that we think are tangential that could play in pretty nicely to where you're at. And so we started talking. I met the executive director there. His name is Dan Stanzione. And if you're not aware, the center is called the Texas Advanced Computing Center, or TAC. It's a federally funded organization. It's affiliated with UT. And they're actually doing almost, or not almost all, but the vast majority of COVID-19 research. So a lot of these visualizations, and when you read articles about these new discoveries, a lot of that compute is happening there. So they're just doing some amazing stuff with security and just that's just innovative across the board. And so, yeah, Dan and I were talking, and we landed on multi-factor authentication as being a really important component to how any system or application is going to need to be secured in the future, because identity is now the new perimeter. We used to think of it as like a firewall or a moat, where you build this wall around your company and you keep the bad folks out. Well, now it's really moved to the login, and so we realized that's a space that we can go and be disruptive. And so together we launched Evo Security, and that was kind of the genesis of it. It from meeting him to launching the company was about 6 months. We did a bunch of market research, and that was the start. What we do now is a lot different, but that's how we got started. But yeah, we named the company Evo because obviously for what they're doing there at the centers is incredible. But we also had some pretty different ideas on how to build a meaningful commercial product that was different than what's happening out in the real world. So.
Man, well, thank you so much for giving us that background. I mean, you're talking about some really important things and transformative things too. I mean, security is always top of mind, almost in whatever sort of software or internet-based business that you're working on, or even like device security and all of that. And it's only going to become more and more relevant as more of these things become integrated with our lives. And especially in a time like the pandemic that we're all in now, as more people get pushed to service platforms and having to do more integration, security and identity security too. And thank you for giving us a little bit of background on the difference between how traditional security things we're looking at and where it sort of started to pivot. So when you talked about like this, you never thought that you would get into this, which completely we all identify with. I think it's really great to see people who start off doing things like, oh, I'm going to go do this stuff and it's going to be great and I'm going to have this amazing career in it, and then I pivot because something cool and interesting came up and now I do something completely different. So as you were pivoting and you were looking at, building out Evo Security, or the first iteration of Evo Security, you had said something about doing 6 months worth of market research, but, how did you take it from the research phase and move it into this beginning stages of building a product?
Yeah, that's, to be very honest with you, I didn't really know how to do that at first. I just knew that I needed to figure out what the facts were, and understand how is the space evolving, and what are the mental models that I need to build for myself and for our team, in order for us to be successful. And so, but we had to start somewhere. It's, the saying, how do you eat an elephant? You just got to take one bite at a time. And I realized that's the position that I was in, on many fronts, pretty much all fronts. And so we started with what the product, they were using an MFA tool that they had, it was some open source code, and they'd massaged it and made it their own to protect their own center. And it's been working great for, years. And so I knew that was a good kernel to start out with. So what we did is we targeted other supercomputing centers and other data centers, said, hey, what do you think about this? It's working over here. We're working with, NASA and the DOE and all kinds of other really important organizations, and we're protecting the center. And it turned out that most centers that we were targeting are more about like open research. And so locking things down to the world wasn't necessarily their first priority. But in that process, I started having a bunch of conversations with people in the space. And I realized very quickly that really where the attack surface is expanding is coming from, large enterprises down into kind of the small to medium business and kind of mid-market enterprise. There was a bunch of, articles coming out about that. And it was really obvious to me that that's sort of the future. But, I realized that we're going to have a scaling problem on trying to go one by one. We'd have to be super well capitalized, and we were going to have to really figure out a different strategy, and if we wanted to go that direction. And there was a ton of new stuff we were going to have to build around that core authentication code that TAC was using. And so that's when we had our aha moment, and I started talking to a couple of different advisors that I'd kind of, befriended, and we realized that, hey, one way to scale, actually, if we want to go this direction and pivot, is to offer a solution through managed service providers. And if you're not familiar with what they're called, MSPs, but MSPs, they're responsible for about 25% of the global $1 trillion IT spend. And basically they manage IT on behalf of all these small to medium businesses and enterprises. And they say, okay, here's your email product, here's your your MFA tool, here's your this, here's your that. And they just offer it in a bundle. And so we realized that if we just target being a critical part of that stack, then that's how we can scale, because one MSP might manage 50 to 100 small to medium businesses. And so that was kind of that was the journey of it all. But it took about another 6 months after the first 6 months just to realize that. So we were a year into the company. We had something that worked, but it took that long to really develop our strategy that we thought was a competent one. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. I really appreciate that perspective quite a bit. Having a background as a research analyst myself, it seems like, you notice through your own readings and through your own discussions with mentors and things that there is an opportunity here, but to go in and do that kind of extensive research and then get through that first round and then take it again another round to help develop a better strategy. Like, okay, so now we kind of know what's going on, and this is how we think we can be best positioned to enter the market and move forward and really get that level of scale that you're talking about is very commendable. I think there's a lot of founders out there who have these really brilliant, great ideas and know that they are solving a problem. Maybe they just don't understand how it's already being solved or whether or not it's really viable, because other people might not think that it's as big of a problem, or their market might be much more small, or much smaller than what they anticipated. So I think it's really important that you've done all of that work, and thank you for sharing some of that. In the past, we've asked that if people have any questions or comments, please go ahead and drop them in to our Facebook or our YouTube live channels. We definitely want to hear from you. I know that there are a lot of cybersecurity enthusiasts and entrepreneurs and founders in San Antonio, as well as in other places, that are wanting to figure out, how do I approach these kinds of markets? And especially since defense projects and other highly important mission critical data could be leveraged through MSPs services, or protected by MSPs. And so Michael is a really great person to talk to, and we'd love to hear any comments or questions you might have. So moving forward, when you're talking about your first customer, so you did 6 months of initial research, then another 6 months of strategy research. How did you then take it from that one supercomputer, client, to then moving into other clients? What was your approach to just getting in front of people?
Yeah, first I had, in that second 6 months, I had to really understand the lay of the land and, really develop a customer persona. So who is my customer? Who am I selling to? What do they care about? When you say a managed service provider, well, what does that really mean? Does that mean the person who runs the MSP? Does it mean their marketing person? Does it mean their techs that are actually the ones doing the work? Well, it turns out that our customer persona are actually the people that are doing the work. So they're admins and techs. And sometimes in a smaller MSP, that is the leader. And so I just tried to talk to as many of them as possible. I was just beating the streets. I mean, picking up the phone, trying to network through LinkedIn. I think I made like 500 LinkedIn connections in like 3 months or 4 months, just trying to reach out to people and say, hey, look, here's where we're at. I don't really have anything yet, but my intentions are pure, and that this is what we're doing, and this is our background, so that we're serious. And over time, took about, I would say, after that first 12 months, it probably took another month or two where I started to really define what it is that we need to do to build the product accordingly, and it was starting from the top. And so it was just really, really important for me. And I actually went and took some executive courses on design thinking and understanding the customer journey and the persona, and how to really architect that out, and then build your product from the inside out in order to really solve their problems or their pain points. And so, I guess it was about last year, like almost 12 months ago now, but it was last summer, we started to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's our initial roadmap for our MVP, and let's start building. And so while I was doing all that networking, I was also assembling a new team, because the original team that we had, it was just sort of like a temporary thing. We were just leveraging all the engineers at the supercomputing center. And so now we actually had to like start paying people to build product. And so it was all sort of converging at the same time, but that's how we started. Yeah.
Mel, thank you. I mean, we like pulling back the curtain and showing founders on kind of just the amount of work that it takes to be able to get those things, and hear about the successes, as well as some of the failures. So if you wouldn't mind just touching like really briefly on some of the pivots maybe that you've had to deal with, that you think would be really important for founders trying to get into this space, to know about, that we'd really appreciate it too.
Yeah. So, since we started Evo in 2018 to now, so it's been 2 years, the multi-factor authentication space in general, and really the security space in general, has shifted dramatically. And I guess maybe I'll throw in a third category there, and that's the managed service provider space. So I'll get to the pandemic in a second, but the rapid adoption of cloud, and I think it's been overused now, but the whole digital transformation of companies, what that really means to me is not what a consulting company wants you to believe. What it means is this big sort of like animal that you're just trying to get your arms around. Really what it means is that, to me, is that companies are now utilizing software that lives in the cloud to develop more efficient processes or solve problems in ways that they couldn't before. And I noticed that that trend was starting to permeate the managed service provider space really rapidly. And where they were having the older models was like, hey, we go to your office, we set up a server in a closet, and then we run cabling everywhere and we fix your stuff, and then we leave. Well, now the servers are replaced with, the cloud servers. And so now software and creating great margins with software and making sure that software integrates and is flexible is a new territory for a lot of those leaders in the managed service provider space. So, and they're having a lot of trouble trying to develop those efficiencies on, I'm basically reinventing my business. So we saw that shift happening. And at the same time, MSPs themselves were starting to get hacked more than ever in history. Small to medium businesses and enterprises were getting hacked more than ever in history. And a lot of it had to do with the cloud. So from when we started to where we are today, those numbers have increased like several hundred, like 300, 400, 500%. And then when the pandemic hit, it actually compressed it even further. And so now all of those sort of transitionary processes were compounded. What would have probably taken 3 or 4 years happened in 3 or 4 months. So now when we look at like, okay, well, what was our roadmap before and what is it today? It's totally changed, because the things that we thought we're going to do 12 months from now, we're actually doing like right now. So, which is great actually, because our product is 100% SaaS, totally scalable, very modern architecture. So it seems to be fitting seamlessly. And we've been really lucky about that. I thought we were going to have we still have a big mountain to climb, but I thought that we were going to have to get over a bunch of other smaller mountains that would have taken a while. So that's a positive. But yeah, when you think about pivoting, timing, depending on what's happening in the world, could either cause you to pivot. Maybe it's what you learn from the market. It says, hey, we just really don't like this. These problems existed before. Maybe they don't exist now. And that could be detrimental, or it could actually work in your favor. And so I think pivots aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think they're usually good things. Yeah.
I think that they can be, for sure. Absolutely. And thank you for that. It's no secret at this point, we're, at least here in the US, we're about 6 months into dealing with the COVID-19 issues and challenges that have come as a result. So pivoting is just something that we're all kind of having to kind of deal with. And at least with startup companies, typically, you can be a little bit more agile. I think that this current situation is just a really great example of there is no formula for business success or successful startup creation. Really, like, you could have an amazing product, you could have a fantastic marketing team, and you could have money in the bank. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can plan for all contingencies, or that, something else might shift. There's a little bit of luck, magic, and timing that kind of comes from getting this whole thing off the ground. And the risks and things that are associated with breaches or with compromised systems. I think I read, and this was a couple years ago, so just for everybody to kind of have a little bit of perspective, like, I think that for every file that gets either ransomed or captured or whatever, it's like $184 per file. And so if you have a breach, that could be millions of dollars worth of damage that a company is going to have to figure out how to fix, not even mentioning the risk that it's posed to their users. And so having something like Evo Security in place for managed service providers that are touching so many clients, it's really transformative for them as well as the actual users who could ultimately be compromised. And so this is a very important piece to have moving forward. So thank you, Michael, for talking about that. And if you want to expand on that or correct me, please go ahead, because like I said, it's been a while.
No, you did a great job. That was awesome. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, cool. Um, so, I know that you talked about going to school in Austin and that you were doing a bunch of oil and gas stuff here in Texas, which, makes a lot of sense for what we do here in Texas. But Michael is from Austin, and we're very excited because he's one of two Austin founders that are currently participating in the San Antonio Geekdom Pre-accelerator. And so, Michael, we'd love to hear more from you, being from Austin, kind of your experience of dealing with the San Antonio community at large and, how you feel the pre-accelerator has been going so far.
Yeah, I'll start out first by saying the pre-accelerator has been incredible. It really has. It's interesting, what our deliverables and responsibilities are as a company. They're really aligning with the timing of what we're learning within the pre-accelerator, and so it's just the compression that's happening for myself personally in what I'm learning, and for the actual company. Every single time that I get off the phone or we have our Thursday calls, I'm implementing what I've learned the very next day, and I'm talking to customers, I'm talking to investors, and so this is to me, this has been extraordinarily valuable. So I would say it's probably the most high octane pre-accelerator that I could possibly imagine, in a great way. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here in Austin. I grew up in Houston. I spent a lot of time in Dallas. I also spent a lot of time in San Antonio because when I was in oil and gas, I was always staying there, passing through, or I have friends there. There's just a lot of activity. So it kind of became like my pseudo home for a long time. And so I've always known about the community, but Austin's growing so much that it's becoming a lot more competitive, and it's becoming a lot, I wouldn't say harder. Everybody's pretty friendly, but there's a lot more competition to stand out and really do well. And what really was really attractive to me about Geekdom was that I just loved the feel of the community. It just seemed to be really personable. Everyone's really wants you to succeed. It's sort of a higher touch experience, and it was very easy to join the community and very easy to just co-locate down there before everything happened, and I could actually just spend time down there. San Antonio being kind of a security centric place was really important for me. That was actually kind of one of the first draws. And yeah, then when I went down and saw the building, saw what was going on, I was like, wow, this is actually really special. So everything just felt right for it. So yeah, I think what San Antonio, I can see, having the perspective being in Austin and then looking at what's happening here, the ingredients are all there for Geekdom, and I just think it's just going to continue to be a great place for entrepreneurs. So I'm very happy with everything so far.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, I know I'm incredibly biased as I am managing the pre-accelerator this year, and I'm currently managing this Zoom call with you. However, I think it's really fantastic. I think I remember when you came down to actually see Geekdom and to talk through about like what we do and how you could participate. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like he's coming from Austin, and I know that we have immensely valuable things, but it does us and our community a lot of good to know that the value that we perceive and that we know that we're delivering that exceptional level of service to our members as well as to the community at large is actually truly there. And it does offer that high touch experience that you're talking about. And that's not to diminish any of the resources in Austin at all. I mean, it's an incredibly active space, but San Antonio and particularly Geekdom has been driving quite a bit in this space. And so going on 9 years, it's really nice to see that we are offering something that is so valuable to you. And we really do enjoy having you in our space as well. And hopefully when we can co-locate again, that you'll return to our space and be more entrenched in our community moving forward. So I know that Evo Security, has been looking at potentially like raising some funds or getting some investment, and you yourself kind of have a background in investment. And so if you would please, just for the founders out there that are looking on getting involved in these things, can you kind of speak to your experiences and sort of what you've been working on?
Yeah. For the first thing I'll say is that even though the world has changed and there's some headwinds that we're facing, there's still capital. And I would differentiate that by saying that I think venture capital is kind of tough right now. If you don't have good traction, or you de-risked your opportunity by a pretty substantial margin. But the sort of pre-seed angel level capital, most of the people that are going to be willing to invest in your company at that stage, they get it. They realize, like, look, either they've been an entrepreneur before, or they realize that some of the best companies in the world today were actually founded in the financial crisis. And I think that trend is going to continue. And I think people know that. Good ideas and good companies that are solving great problems you can find funding. That doesn't mean that it's easy. I mean, I spent a lot of time, as you mentioned, I was in private equity after I was an engineer for about 5 years. And so I really learned how to present myself and my ideas, and create a compelling business case in addition to a technical product case. And so I think I rolled those experiences into this, and it was like, okay, we have this really amazing opportunity. Who do I need to find to convince? And it's just, you just got to keep circling it. And you realize when you look back, you're like, okay, I was definitely talking to the wrong people initially, but then all of those introductions continued you get closer and closer and closer to the right people. And I was able to find 3 investors earlier this year. Actually, the first 2 investments we received were in March, right when everything was happening. And then my lead investor joined in May. He's an incredible person. He's also functioning as an advisor, like helping me out about one day, what surmounts to about 1 day a week in the company. So I feel really fortunate for that, but I worked really hard to get to that place. I mean, it took probably 6 months, actually probably more like 7 months, just to get to that place of nonstop, reaching out. So, the other part to that is, so the route we went is we have a convertible note. I really like a SAFE or a convertible note as the instrument to raise like your early angel round. I think it's just fair for everybody. So if you're a founder and you're giving away equity, like, I would really think about twice about that right now, because it kind of values your company from day one and kind of draws a line in the sand that it's hard to kind of dig out from. But look, if your company's doing great and everything's going well, then investors will look past that. But so we have a convertible note that we issued. We have about 80% of it left to fill out, and we're just bootstrapping until then. But yeah, we're having a lot of investor meetings again right now, because we've been performing well. So our previous investors like, oh wow, okay, well now I need to introduce you to this person and this person. And that's just kind of how it works. So, but yeah, it was not easy, but that's the nature of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so important for other founders to know just kind of what this looks like and how to participate. And it's kind of a black box scenario. Every investment VC equity group is a little bit different. And so even if you can't necessarily get meetings with those investment firms or those groups, like, what you should do is really look and see what kinds of companies they're investing in, right? So that way you can kind of see, like, oh, well, these are kind of like me. And so maybe what they're doing is finding startups like myself to invest in. And then that way, you can maybe cut down some of that cold calling or that cold emailing that's going to expend some of those energies. But what I really think is great about what you touched on is that your investors that you've managed to secure in the last 5 months, that there's a real relationship there. Having an investor as an advisor on your startup is really huge, and getting that relationship and not just the capital to help drive you forward, I think also helps push you towards that level of success. So outside of the paperwork formation or the kinds of investment notes that you guys are asking for, like, just that you made it a priority to align yourself with investors that cared about you and your team, as well as the overall success and not just that ROI, I think makes for a better relationship in general, and also just a better experience and probably trajectory for your company as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been so important, actually. There's just things that I always the way I think of it, it's, and I'm sure you've heard this, but it's like you want to try and convert your unknown unknowns into known unknowns, and then convert those into known knowns, right? And so there's just so many blind spots that you have. I mean, coming into a new industry, I mean, everything's been new for me, even though I have a lot of professional experience. I kind of push the reset button in a way. And so that's been so helpful. And even if you're thinking about like raising capital, maybe what you do is you just start out and say, well, who can be my advisor first? Or set of advisors. Because what I've learned with all my reach outs is that, you know, a lot of people are busy, but people really do like to help, and they really do like to offer their experiences and, you know, guidance and wisdom. I think it's just sort of like a human quality that makes you feel good. And so, uh, you know, and if you start kind of assembling a bunch of advisors that are sort of guiding you along the way, soon enough that can turn into, they say, hey, you know what, I like this, I like the maturity of this idea and how it's evolved, and I really like this entrepreneur, and we've become friends. I'm going to put some money behind them, and let's, you know, let's see how this works, and then I'm going to bring in my friends. And so that's, I don't think there's, it's like, it's not really a linear process, you know. It's just sort of at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, you just have to rely on your grit, and you say, what can I be doing right now? And the answer should always be something. And that should be calling somebody, reaching out to somebody,
Yeah.
not being, I mean, and it's just the only thing standing in between that action and then you is really fear. But what's interesting is that when you kind of like peel the layer off of the fear, you realize like there's nothing there. It just was, it was all in your mind. And so you just need to go. And that's how, that's really how it works on a daily basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey. So we do have a question that came in. Thank you, Omar. So what makes Evo different from Duo and Okta? OKTA.
Okta,
Okta.
yeah.
Okta. There we go.
Yeah. So, well, it's a great question. It's usually the first one that we get. The difference, the main, so we're solving both a product problem and a business problem with our solution. Both the easiest way to frame it, well, first of all, Duo and Okta are incredible companies, by the way. So I really admire what they've done. They've been very successful. So with Duo and Okta, they're really focused more on large enterprise solutions. Duo does, you know, do some middle market and kind of SMB, but they have channel programs where they're offering their product to managed service providers. So that instead of saying that we're going to be an MFA company with a channel partner program, our approach was that if you really start to understand the customer, the MSP, what they love more than anything in the whole world is that when a vendor is building a product specifically for them. And that means that you have to understand all of the little nuances that are required to be an MSP. And really what they are, they're entrepreneurs. Is they're juggling, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 clients, which means that the way that they manage things on a daily basis and the administrative workflows, the types of functionalities and features that are really important to them for their products are very different than what a large enterprise solution looks like. And so while at the end of the day, you know, authentication is authentication, right? It's, you know, you go to log in, you receive a push notification, you tap I approve, or you enter your 6-digit code. The authentication engine, you know, make sure you are who you say you are, and then you're granted access. That part's kind of table stakes at this point. So where our value really comes into play is understanding how an MSP wants to manage a service or a security product. And what's interesting about them is that they don't, their security in general is not necessarily like a strong suit. It's more like IT related stuff, like networking and a lot of the kind of basic elements that really make your business hum along, where you just show up and you're like, okay, everything works great. But security in the last 1 to 2 years has just become a major problem. And so kind of from an education and awareness and a training standpoint, they're playing a bit of catch up. So for us, when you think about when you're implementing a security solution, it's got to be point and click. It's got to be easy configuration. It's got to align with all of their workflow and the nuances on how they want to manage their clients. They have to protect themselves, and it's got to play nicely with all their clients' solutions. And so it just opens up this entire new paradigm of value. And we are headfirst in all of it in building out those solutions for those pain points.
Man, security MSP for MSPs. I love it. Because I imagine it's sort of like herding cats. Like MSPs are herding cats all the time. So who's going to be herding the herder of cats? And maybe you can help do some of that. We did have, I guess, like an expanded question, which was, can you talk, and I think you kind of started setting it up, right, about setting up or creating new opportunities for these MSPs as a result of this. So can you talk about the MSP market and how they need to change their business models? In terms of your perspective, I guess.
Yeah. And I would really, what we're doing and what's critical to the ethos of our business is that to serve a managed service provider, it's not important for us to, be advertising ourselves as hey, we're Evo and we now need to make you assimilate to our workflow. It's actually the opposite. We want to assimilate to their workflow and be invisible in the background to the best extent possible. So this isn't about me or our company. This is about serving the MSP, period. And so in doing that, we really have to understand where the market's heading. And I mentioned earlier about kind of how the pandemic's really compressed the timeline from the old break fix sort of strategy for an MSP, which is when you would go into somebody's office and actually manually configure things, to, hey, everyone's moving to the cloud. And so now if we're going to be a managed service provider, we need to offer a really curated selection of what's called their managed stack or their software stack. So it's a curated selection of applications and systems that accomplish the same goals as before. But now as the managed service provider, your job is more about optimizing, focusing on security, and making sure that the livelihood of their clients is protected. And so what we're seeing in the market right now is, and actually, if you're familiar with a company called Solarwinds, their HQ is here in Austin. They're a publicly traded company. They just announced last week that they're actually spinning out their entire MSP division, which I think it's probably, I think it's less than half of their market cap, but they see just a massive, massive growth opportunity in that space. They think a very giant growth wave is coming. So any small to medium business or enterprise that wasn't using an MSP before, which is about half the market, they're going to start using them just by nature of cloud and the way that business is moving. And then on top of that, distribution channels, instead of trying to sell direct to the enterprise, but using, it's just really hard. I mean, think about how many cloud products are out there. I mean, every day it seems like you can find 30 or 40 new ones. And so how do you decipher through as a small to medium business or enterprise, like which ones are the best? And so that's really where the value of the MSP comes in and other distribution channels. And so the sort of post-pandemic world and where the market's heading is distribution, service providers. And then if you have a product that aligns with those things and not tries to say, hey, well, we're a large enterprise product, but we have like bits and pieces that would be helpful. I think anyone who can align with that strategy is going to reduce the friction to success. And so that's kind of the approach we took with it. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for those who are dropping questions in the chat. We really appreciate it. We've got about 20 minutes left of your time, Michael. And so I know that we've kind of touched on this in a little bit, and I think people would want to know more about you too, as the founder of this, having transitioned into a founder role, moving from an engineer and working in investments. How have you adjusted to the new lifestyle? And do you have any like ways that you unplug that you think is really helpful that other founders should consider? Or how do you stave off mental fatigue and collapse from all of the things that you have going on?
Yeah, well, I feel like a little bit of imposter saying this now because I just got off like my 6th consecutive 80 to 90 hour week because we just launched our product internally with our partners. But it is extremely important. So I would say here's the number one thing that I do is I've generated a really high level of awareness about my stress level. So when I feel something start to bubble and I'm like, wow, I'm just really worn out, or I feel really stressed, I always do like a series of breaths, just making sure that I can like decompress back down. You'd be surprised, like just throughout the day, if you feel yourself stressed, you just take, breathe in, hold for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 4 seconds. You do that 5 or 6 times, and you'll start to notice like your stress level throughout the day just kind of like inch down. And so I try and maintain like a pretty even keel on that. That's really important. But sometimes you're just going, you just got stuff to do. And so I always make sure that if I realize that I'm entering fatigue, that I don't just put away my computer and just like, or I don't just close the my laptop and then leave it on the desk. I actually put it in my bag. I put it in a closet. I get all of my stuff off my desk and I just put it away. And that way it's just out of sight, out of mind. And I go do something that is really, something that I really like. We were talking before this, and I just absolutely love the hill country. And so it could be as easy as just getting in your car and just driving around and just, doing nothing. I mean, just get your mind out of the sort of entrepreneur mindset and into a more human mindset. And I think that's like been really key for me. But the reality is that you're never going to do everything that you want to be able to do. And so it's also about really being honest with yourself and honest with what the market is telling you and honest with what your responsibilities are for the company, and making sure that you prioritize those and just knock them off one by one. And I actually use a list, and I call it my first next list. And so it could be as simple as write email to Joe, or call Joyce and tell her how awesome Geekdom is. Or like whatever it is. It's as small as it could be, but that way, just like you're mapping out your day, and things get off track like really fast. And so, but at least it kind of keeps you centered in what you're doing, so everything's not so crazy in your head. Those are just kind of a few things, but there's no like, I don't know if there's like a real rigid framework. I think everybody's a little bit different, but as long as you're focused on value and taking care of yourself, I think you can find a balance. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I mean, I know that this is just something that is so, it gets talked about. I hear in entrepreneurial circles, people talk about founder burnout, and we talk about some other things, but when you look at just, how intense the founder lifestyle is, just because everything is an emergency or it's a peak or it's a valley, like really needing to find tools and ways that work for us, and everyone is different, like you mentioned, to reconnect and center and kind of take a step back, because it's not a normal trajectory of approach. You have very like compressed deadlines. Every sort of thing that's happening is just heightened. And so thank you for sharing that. For people who are in the San Antonio local community, if you really do want to know more about how to adopt some of these breathing techniques or mindfulness principles into your business so that you can step away, I really encourage you to check out Mindfulness in San Antonio, or MISA. There's also some other really great things at the Geekdom community space, like Mellowbee is a fantastic company for you to meditate, as well as to just enjoy really comfortable seating cushions and things like that for your office as well as your home. But Julia Bates, the founder of that, also does mindfulness practices. And then Inner Ally is something that Dr. Cynthia Phelps has also created, which is just a really fantastic set of tools and practices that you can adopt and implement, as well as like do that within your teams as well. Because I think, Michael, you're kind of a sole founder outside of your advisors. But it's important to, if you do have a team, to kind of connect with them outside of all of their responsibilities and take that step back as well. So thank you for that. We've got about 15 minutes left. So if you do have any additional questions for Michael, now's the time to drop them in the chat, or you can follow up with him. I'm sure Evo Security has a really great way to get in contact with him. But what kinds of tools have you been using, or services have you used that's really transformed how you do your work for Evo Security that you could maybe mention or share with the other founders in the space?
Yeah, I've tried to keep that pretty simple. We really don't need much. I mean, when you're building software, you just need to have the tools that allow you to do that. So, I mean, your GitHubs and your GitLabs, and it really, I think it really kind of has more to do with the process of building software, as opposed to what we're using, to manage our processes. I mean, I Notion is a really good tool that I use every day to really organize our company. And Office 365. I mean, I'm not a big Google person, but I really like I just like the professionalism with Microsoft's product there. But really automating as much as you possibly can in the software development lifecycle, and making sure that we kind of have this like agile Scrum sort of ish development process. I think any startup at our stage is probably it's just really hard to just stick with one. You just got to build stuff. And so but having structure and making sure, what I've found personally that really reduces the friction from making sure that the idea goes into is manifested into reality, I see it as my responsibility to do the mock-ups, have everything specced out like really well. And if I can do that, then I deliver that to the team and I say, hey, look, this is what we're going to build, and this is what you need to consider as you're building it. And what could have taken 3 or 4, 6 weeks to build takes like 2, depending on the complexity of the product. But it just allows people to really reduce any question marks, and then ultimately that equates, depending if they're full-time or if they're a contract, then that equates to dollars and cents, right? So just trying to stay really, really, really lean and scrappy, I think, is key. So any way that you can find waste, and if it's a tool or if it's a process, we try to implement it. So.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. So we do have a couple of questions, and we might have to kind of backtrack just a little bit. So I hope you're game.
Yeah.
But someone who was tuning in late, they asked, would it be possible for you to do a high-level overview of the product, like minute, 2-minute, real quick?
Yeah, sure. So at Evo Security, we're a cybersecurity company. We have a 100% SaaS multi-factor authentication solution. It scales effortlessly to any number of clients, so that doesn't matter how many clients the MSP has. It's super flexible, highly available, highly or fault tolerant and redundant. So it's a very, very modern architecture for multi-factor authentication. That's kind of a differentiator. Most platforms are fairly monolithic in their architecture. And then on top of that, what we've done is we've built out several modules that really enable the managed service provider and allows them to integrate authentication into their stack and their client stack in ways that are a little bit easier than all of the other kind of larger enterprise solutions that are on the market. And so we're also solving a couple of other really unique problems that MSPs face once MFA is installed, and it just becomes really complex on how to manage that. We think it's going to be a game changer. But so we're not just solving the authentication, protecting the login issue for the small to medium business, which is the client of the MSP, but we're also protecting the MSP and bridging the gap between how that software really works on both sides of the fence. And from what we've seen, that really hasn't happened so far, and in a way that we think is possible. So that's the product. It's multi-factor authentication. That's just really our start, though. If you're familiar with zero trust, which is kind of like a broader security concept that's been around for several years, and really what it means is you need to authenticate your users, you need to authenticate your devices, and you need to have privileged access. And so the combination of those things means you're basically assuming zero trust across your entire company, whether you're trusting your employees or your contractors, whoever it might be. And so what we're offering today is really just the first step in a broader zero trust solution that we're going to build out. But we're kind of in the background architecting things to where it won't be a heavy lift in the future as we rapidly release those additions. So that's probably a good overview.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We appreciate it. So there's two more questions. So what does the experience look like for users and MSPs, which you may have already just kind of covered, but I don't know if you wanted to touch on that one a little bit more.
Yeah, it's very similar to what you're used to. So if anybody's enabled, Microsoft offers if you have Office 365, you can enable their authenticator for free. But of course, you have to pay a lot to kind of do their larger full-on identity solution, which is what we do. The experience is very similar to that, where you scan a QR, as the end user, you just scan a QR code, you go to log into your application or system, and we've really streamlined that process where you just type in your password, and then as soon as you click enter, a push notification shows up. You tap approve on your phone, and no clicking around on other screens or anything. It's just really seamless, and then you're in. So when we've compared our process to like Okta and Duo, we're actually as fast and sometimes faster from the start of when a user receives a push, and then you're actually in the application. So yeah, from that standpoint, it's very similar. But the other side of the house where we're offering value is to the MSP. When they're actually in the product and they're configuring things, I have this internal rule, and it's called 10 to 1 and 1 to 10. And so if we can take 10 steps and turn it into 1 step, but make sure that one step offers the value of 10 steps, we're going to do it. And if we can't get it, it's almost impossible to get all the way there every time because it's just kind of complex, but it's just sort of a guidepost. And so we've made this really, really clean UI that's as point and click and low code as possible with respect to integrations and how we integrate with the different applications and systems. And we just want to make it, a great analogy would be, we don't want you to feel like you're a construction worker trying to build a high rise to implement security. We want it to be like you can just build with some Legos and you're good. So that's kind of like a general approach we're taking. So the whole side of the house for the MSP is just really, really simple.
Awesome, thank you. And so the last question that came in from the chat was, does Evo have a multi-tenancy built into the platform? And maybe you touched on that too, but maybe you'd like to address a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's the very core of the product from a functionality standpoint is that, if we didn't have multi-tenancy, then we couldn't really build a product for MSPs. So absolutely. And within each tenant, they can have any number of directories assigned to them. So if they have, let's say, some on-prem, LDAP ADs and a couple of Azure ADs, you can roll any number of those underneath your tenant. But it is a true multi-tenancy platform where everything's differentiated even down to the database. So that's a critical part of the architecture from the ground up. Absolutely.
Muted. Okay, great. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. And so I want to kind of end things with, you have a lot going on. And I know that, you can't talk about all the things that you're doing, especially being a security company, but what's on the horizon for you? What does the next couple of months or even weeks look like that you'd love to share with us?
Yeah, we're in a really exciting time right now. I mean, we spent really the last few months of last year getting our product sort of ready for trials. And so the first quarter of this year, we were doing some trials. They went really well. When the pandemic hit, we kind of pulled the reins back a little bit and spent a lot of time back in the product, knowing that we would be ready for summer. And so during that time, we also signed a distribution agreement with a global distributor, and they work with hundreds of MSPs around the world. And so we architected a plan and are about to launch here in a month our worldwide campaign, and it's going to be the Evo public release basically. And so we have a lot of work to do to prepare for that. And with that, though, is going to come a lot of interesting functionality and new features that we think are going to really allow the MSP to have just an overall better experience for themselves and for their customers, like I've described. But there's just a lot of work that we have to do to prepare for that. Some new functionalities that I can't disclose right now, but I think are really going to fill some big gaps in the market and make the lives of MSPs a lot easier. So I'm actually extremely excited about that. I'm geeking out really hard about being able to offer that. I just really, really want it to work well, and I want people to really love the product. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we are. This is kind of an interesting mindset shift, but we've had some pretty good feedback. And so historically, I was thinking to myself that, man, I need to plan for failure, and I need to make sure that we're doing all the things to plan for failure. But because of the feedback we've received, and I'm just really, really happy with the way our team has executed and how the product works. I think it's rock solid. It's not perfect yet. I mean, we're getting there, but it's close. And but I'm super. I think the bones are good, for everything. And but I'm just. Well, I was going to divulge something that I probably shouldn't, so I'm going to leave that behind. But I'm just really happy with the direction, and I think things are gonna go well. But my advisor said the other day, he was like, I'm really impressed with how you've been able to execute. I think it's time we start planning for success, because what happens if we release in a month or two and 100 people show up at your door and say, I want this now, are you ready? And that was sort of a kind of a aha moment for me, because I realized, like, at some point in time as an entrepreneur, you need to start shifting your mindset from, oh my gosh, hopefully someone, will like this and believe in me and want to pay for my product, to, maybe they actually do, and we're close. And so maybe it's time that we start really indulging in that and planning to go execute it in a really big way. And so that's where I am personally as next steps. And the product, I think, hopefully the launch goes well. So.
Well, we'll be rooting for you for the launch for sure. And I think that you brought up something very important. In startup culture, like, you want to fail fast. You want to be okay with failure, right? F up nights is a thing that's really popular for a lot of people, because you can come and hear all of the horror stories, as well as learn like what not to do and hope that you don't do it too. But I think that whenever you approach any project or endeavor, especially if there's a value or that spark of something amazing, that you do need to have, contingency plan if things go awry, but also, what if things are absolutely amazing and you are successful, which is the point, right? Like, your goal is to be successful. And so thank you for touching on that and for helping to remind founders that it's not all like, oh, if this bottoms out, what are we going to do? But what are we going to do if we go viral overnight and we have to suddenly just hit the market at scale? Can we manage that kind of growth? Very good points. to talk about. So thank you. This has been an excellent conversation with Michael Roth, founder of Evo Security and one of our amazing 2020 Geekdom Pre-accelerator startup founders. We have a couple of things to keep you in, on top of mind for next week. So if you guys are going to be able to tune in next Tuesday, we're going to have our week 5 startup spotlight for the Pre-accelerator with 10-4 Golf and Jarrett Shula, the founder, which is going to be really amazing. That's a super cool product. Can't wait for you guys to hear more about that. We also have 2 community spotlights next week. So we're going to be working with the Minority Business Development Agency to talk about some of the things coming with the new stimulus packages or potential stimulus packages, or if you received a stimulus package and how minority business owners can take advantage of their services and then some. And then also on Friday, we're going to be meeting with the Big Sun Project. So Robert Miggins, one of the founders for Go Smart Solar, is going to be here talking about the Big Sun Project as our last community spotlight. With that, everybody have a fantastic rest of your week. Michael, thank you. I'll see you on Thursday, and good luck.
Thanks. Appreciate it, everybody. Yep.